I think a tricky tourist monkey is better though, because Jeff,
no, Jeff's not a tricky.
That's what he
tourist
wants to
monkey.
be. I feel
No.
like that's.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast, the weekly podcast dedicated to conversations on faith and culture. We are your hosts. I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
Thank you for joining us this week. This week, we're going to be answering the question, how do you have a meaningful response to environmental issues? And in our segment, we're going to be doing a Knowin Jemonen segment, and we're going to be answering the question, what is your animal? Or what animal would you be if you were
An animal.
an animal?
We are animals, Jeff. Right.
We're not talking for ourselves. We're deciding for each other, which is
What
going to be
animal we would
entertaining,
be?
I hope.
Oh,
Yes. That
it sounds
is
a
going to be
little bit
interesting.
scary, but
It
I'm
does.
down.
I'm telling you right now, if you pick sloth, I'm going to be offended and hang up. Because it'd be too real. All right, anyway. So this week we're going to be talking about meaningful responses to environmental issues, which we know, which is, again, our habit. This is a huge issue, and there's a lot of elements. So we figured a grounding question would help us kind of bring out the elements that are most important to us, and then we can kind of hash that out over the next several years as we talk to you every week on a Tuesday morning as you drive in your car and listen. And maybe you won't have a car in 5 years because we changed the world with our
Self-driving
conversations.
cars, I hope they're coming. Oh my God.
Although I thought about the side issue. If self-driving cars might destroy the meaning of podcasting. Like, people listen to a podcast because they're driving a car and they all only can listen. But if you can watch a movie or choose a podcast, like...
No, people
do-
like do it, while they go on runs or
True.
when they're at work doing boring stuff. However you
Very
listen,
true.
we welcome you.
And email a link to our show to everyone in your office.
Yeah. Actually, I am curious. I wish people would write in and tell us like how and when and where they listen.
I've heard some
Yes.
people. Some people have told me that they listen in the car. Quite a few on their commute to work.
Yep.
So our kind of guiding question this week is how do we have a meaningful response to environmental issues, especially when a lot of the rhetoric, and maybe rhetoric's too strong of a word because there's a lot of truth in it, but a lot of the environmental issues that we face today seem hopeless. Like, they seem so big that it's easy to not even take the time to think about it.
Yeah, it's easy to be like, well, it doesn't matter what I do or don't do because these things are so big. And like to some degree, that's kind of true. And that's why it feels bleak, I think, to a lot of us. I think it's great to like sacrifice personally, but if you're putting relationships in peril, that's
Sure.
that can be that's a different conversation, I think.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where we begin is if something is worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. I forgot who said that. G.K. Chesterton, probably. The usual adage is that that's a weird word. Is that if something is worth doing, it's worth doing really well, right? We get in this mindset that we have to be completely perfect. But I'm embracing the idea along with Chesterton that, well, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing at least a little bit of it. So if I can't be perfect, if my relationships require me to turn my AC on, I'm going to do that, right? But if I can set the AC a few degrees down during the summer and save a little bit of the environment a tiny bit at a time, it's worth doing at least some of it. So that's my small nugget.
I think that's a good place to start. So when we're asking the question how to have a meaningful response, I think the first thing you need to do is make sure that the issue is meaningful. Because I think for some people, and I'll speak for myself, coming out of, as we've talked about at length on this show, coming from a conservative evangelical background, the environment was not an issue. In fact, it was only an issue to, in many ways, revolt against. Like, it's not important for a lot of different reasons, which we kind of talked about in our last episode about the end of the world and our theology and stuff like that.
So because people thought the world was ending soon, they actually preached against conservation efforts.
Exactly. So, but I believe, or I have come to believe, because I would say there was a point in my life where I was on board with that. Do whatever you want. It has become a place where doing what you can in a meaningful way, whatever that looks like, is a spiritual response. And and I think we're seeing this a little bit in Christianity Return. Like, I think the Pope, what was it? I think a few months ago came out with kind of his manifesto of like the environment for the Catholic Church, which was pretty groundbreaking for the Catholic Church, and there was a quote in it. It's called the Laodicea, and we'll put a link in the Laodicea. Is that how you pronounce it?
I don't know.
But we'll put a link in the thing. But for me, this quote really stood out and really has been something that in the last few months has really come back and affected me a lot, where he talks about the ecological crisis is also a summons to profound interior conversation. It must be said that some committed and prayerful Christians with the excuse of realism and pragmatism tend to ridicule expressions of concern for the environment. Others are passive. They choose not to change their habits and thus become inconsistent. So what they have is an ecological conversation whereby the effects of their encounter with Jesus becomes evident in their relationship with the world around them. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. It is not an option or a secondary aspect of our Christian experience. And I love that. I feel like that encapsulates how I've come to believe about this issue. And because meaning was finally attached to it for me, it caused me to stop and rethink things that I took for granted on a regular basis.
I can vividly remember in college, we were required to go to chapel 3 times a week. And during one of the chapels, the president, who's a really renowned Christian author and commentary writer on the Bible, preached a sermon where he said, "Step on the grass." That was his kind of unifying theme, where the idea was there are some people that tell you we need to preserve nature and we need to protect it and let wild animals live and let some things be wild. And his idea was that if you look at Genesis, the Bible is written telling humans that the world is theirs to enjoy and they just need to enjoy it. And that's probably where I was at one point as well, Jeff, along with you, is that the environmental movement was a negative thing. It hurt people, it hurt business, it hurt free market, all sorts of stuff. But when I started
enjoying the earth and preserving the earth the same thing?
I know. So
isn't that
that's
at the
true.
heart of
That's
environmentalism?
True. Yeah, right. Well, Teddy Roosevelt was the father of the wildlife refuge system in the United States, and his point was wild animals and wildlife are not just this generation's to enjoy. That was in 1902, I think. It's also for future generations, right? We have to preserve stuff because it is ours to enjoy, but that needs to be preserved for the future, for future generations. And I completely agree. That aside, I started looking at Genesis instead of looking at the world as something that was given to us. I really do read Genesis, at least one of the accounts in the Old Testament, to say that like human beings are seen as caretakers. I think that's the word that the Pope used in the thing Jeff just read, that we were actually given to the planet, and human beings were supposed to bring more order and more good, and they were supposed to tend the garden that God had created. And so in my mind, I don't believe Genesis 1-3 are literal accounts of history. There's a lot of good reasons theologically and scientifically to not believe that, and past episodes on evolution, you can look those up, talk about those things. But I really do see Genesis as being prophetic. I mean, God tells human beings that you are to have dominion over the earth. You're supposed to take charge and take your role as an image bearer of God, someone who loves all of creation. That's in like Psalms. It talks about God's love for creation reaches the heavens, that God cares about animals and feeds the animals, the wild animals and everything in the field. So this God that loves the creation, that God went through all the painstaking process to actually make, like, human beings are given as people who have the responsibility. And I don't think this is controversial at all. The responsibility of being like God for the planet, sustaining life, creating and maintaining diversity, like supplying the world with what it needs to be the sort of place that God had created. And so for us, that's not historical in my mind. We weren't put in the garden, right? That's myth. But it's prophetic in the sense that we have evolved to the point where animals will survive into the future, species, on most often on whether they appeal to us or not. So if there's a type of dog that doesn't appeal to us, breed or whatever, that will die out. But the one that we like and think is cute or endears itself to us will live. And that applies to kind of the whole animal kingdom. We're now at the point where we do have to take charge because we have such a huge impact on this world. And if we don't take that seriously, whether you're a Christian or not, if you don't take that responsibility seriously, we could do a lot of damage. And so I think beginning with faith is a good thing. Maybe.
I think it's important to parse out two different levels of like ethical reasoning that are happening here. There's what you guys are talking about is like a transcendent type of meaning. Like we should care for the earth because it's good, and it just is. Whether you believe God called it good or it is good intrinsically, it should be separated from what we feel like is pretty or worth saving, versus we should do it for the sake of its own self. But there's another level of ecological argumentation that I hear a lot that is very egocentric or anthropocentric, like people centric. It's centered around, we need to save the environment because it's good for people. And that's not a bad line of thinking too, but I think it's important to kind of parse those out. Because what you guys are saying, the transcendent, like we should preserve this thing for its own good, does circle back and benefit humans, but it doesn't make humans the most important thing in all of creation, because I think that's a faulty way to look at the world, as humans being the dominant and most important and only thing that matters. Like we should only preserve the environment so that humans can be sustained, versus saying that all of life deserves to live, you know?
Absolutely. And I would say a human life, there's some people put this to me whenever I talk about ecology. You have the old conversation of, there's this woman who said to the news at one point that standing in the middle of the road was her dog and her son. And if she came up to them in her car at 70 miles per hour, she's not sure which way she would swerve, because their lives kind of matter the same to her. And for me, like, I personally, and I do believe my faith tells me that human life is like valuable, even more valuable than an animal life. But like, those value judgments don't necessarily mean animal life isn't valuable. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know. That's what this conversation degrades to all the time is.
That's a hard one.
Everything you said is fine. Yeah. Everything you said is fine, Mona. Right? Humans are not the sole point of creation, and I completely agree. That's not the way it's supposed to be. But how do you protect the sense that human life is important, and perhaps more important? And Jesus even said, God knows all the sparrows, and is mindful of every single one that exists, but your life matters even more than a sparrow to God. Like you are cared for. God has communicated God's self to us, at least in Christianity, in such a way that you are important. And so there is an element of that needs to be balanced with it. The human good is a very big topic that has to be balanced in tension with ecological stuff. But your point still stands that we're not the end of, even for Christians, we are not the point of creation. We're not this pinnacle of meaning.
I think in Western society, we can speak to a lot of structures, like governmental structures, legal structures, social structures, that have all pointed to preserving the human life over and above everything. Like for example, if someone hit a child over a dog, they would get a lot more time in jail for doing that. You know what I mean? Like our social structures support the fact overwhelmingly that human life is preferential and animals don't matter at all. So I think could be a corrective measure to err on the other side a little bit. Do you know what I mean? And
and that's for thousands of years. That's not just recent. You're talking about like Western civilization as a whole has really seen humans in a different category than everything else. And because we're in this different logical category, we have the right to treat everything else horribly. Yeah, and there definitely needs to be corrective measures against that.
And when I'm saying let's entertain the idea that all life matters pretty much equally, and to value animal life is really ultimately to circle back around and value human life also. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
I think it's hard because it's an interconnected thing. Like our life in general, if we're going to just use it as a thing in of itself, requires a give and take. And I think that in that situation that you're talking about, Alan, that hypothetical where you can hit the dog and whatever, you're not only dealing with the regular consequences of that, but as a human being, and I'm making this assumption, I would be a lot less tormented for the rest of my life if I ran over the dog instead of the child. You know what I mean? Like it would be no question to me. There's a survival instinct in all that. I don't know all the science behind how much of our
to preserve your own species. Yeah,
exactly. And that's relevant. And I think that the problem is I think the problem is setting up that scenario in the first place. Like, which one are you going to hit as this thesis on, well, now you've been exposed for what's more important to you, as opposed to just recognizing life in general is interconnected, and sometimes death happens and our overall our overall focus should be on life as a whole. Not that we can always make the right decision, but I think we can always be at least in the right frame of mind or spirit or whatever we want to call it.
Before we go any further in the ecological conversation, it also, another qualifying thing needs to be said is that death doesn't just sometimes happen. Death always happens to every single living thing on this planet. And
and an integral part of the survival of things
exactly.
is for things
and
to
so
die.
you live because other things have died. Like that, there's no way to extricate ourselves from death. I mean, plants eat animals, animals eat plants. That's just the way that it works. And that's the continual cycle of life. The question is, how do you be a part of that system where there is some necessary death, right, to fertilize the tree that gave you the fruit or whatever? You can't escape that, but how do you do it well and at least conscionable? Is that
maybe one of the most meaningful responses we can have to the environmental issues is not ask questions or propose scenarios that divide people, but instead, you know what I mean? Like, and it seems like all of our hypotheticals are either or.
So not resort to an emotional plea is what you're saying. Actually think through things. And
yeah, exactly.
Okay,
like you believe in guns, so would you shoot Hitler? You know what I mean? Stuff like
that. So
that.
we're beginning the conversation with we can't fix everything. We can't extricate ourselves from the process of death and living off of death. It just happens. But there has to be some concrete things we as individuals and as the co-hosts of Ironic Cast can do to make.
But I want to build. Wait, before you go there, though, I want to build on what you just said. We can't extricate ourselves from the process of death because I think as humans and like the history of civilization is like, especially in more modern times after industrialization, we're constantly trying to escape from nature. We're trying to escape our creatureliness. You know, we build like walls and shelters, and a lot of us don't even know how fruit grows. Like, how does a pomegranate grow? I don't know. Is it on the ground? Is it on a tree? I have no idea. Actually, I do know it's a tree. Pomegranates grow on trees. But a lot of us who live in modern society, we have absolutely no idea what it means to actually be connected to nature. Really.
I read this. I don't know if this is true, but I read that in the 90s there was a power outage in LA, and they got 911 calls from all these people saying there was weird clouds in the sky. But it was just the Milky Way over LA that they had never seen.
That was a meme. I don't know if that was real.
It has to be true.
I
had students in my youth group that have never seen where any of their food comes from. They've never seen food growing on a plant or even a shooting star or anything like that. Like, that's disconnection from nature is really, really true.
I think there's truth in that meme, agreed, but I don't know if it's like actually true. You know what I'm saying?
But we want nature to be at our disposal instead of us being at the disposal of nature, because that scares us. That feels chaotic, right? So if we have a tree on our street, it's because someone put it there for our pleasure. It's not because it does really anything. You know, it might put out a little bit of oxygen. Or like if we have a pool in our backyard, it's not a natural lake. It's something that's been cultivated for us, you know. And I'm taking some of these ideas from a really great book called Songbirds, Truffles, and Wolves about an environmentalist who hikes the Franciscan Trail in Italy. And he talks about how a lot of people hike that trail as a very spiritual, like enriching experience, but all he sees as someone who studies like biodiversity and things like that is just the scars on the landscape of all of the stuff that's been wiped out and all the foliage and the plants and the animals that are not there that should be there, and how like foods like tomatoes are not natural to Italy, but they've taken over the cuisine, and so it's not really, I mean, it is eating local now, but it wasn't historically, and so it's interesting to hear somebody talk about these kinds of things, like what is our relationship to nature. Like, so biodiversity, for example, like what you're saying, Jeff, and what you're saying also, Alan, about like death and interconnection, like when species die out completely, it does have a ripple effect throughout all of ecology, right? Like all ecosystems are like over time, like impacted by that, which means we are also impacted by that, because guess what? We are also part of ecosystems. That's my whole point. Like, we are part of it. We can't escape from it. No matter how much technology we have, no matter how much we can cultivate our environments, we're still creatures. We're still part of ecosystems. We still have to have a relationship to it.
So it's not always an either or as far as cultivation goes, because you can cultivate in such a way. There's a lot of like Taoist principles, even over thousands of years, people in other countries with different sorts of religion that didn't divorce humanity from nature, but upheld that connection. You can cultivate responsibly. It's possible, but we just haven't done it in our Western civilization almost at all. Well,
going back to that analogy that we did with the dog and the kid, there's a difference between choosing to hit the dog and just driving down looking for dogs to hit. You know what I mean? Like there's that line in between. And when we're talking about some species die out, but some species die out not because we did anything. They just died out. Like I read an article recently about panda bears, how they're trying to, breed them and get them to kind of, but they're just not into it. Like almost that the species itself is just kind of, whatever.
I know people who hate pandas because they think they're worthless and stupid.
But but what about
there are creatures that have died out over the years, not because of something we've done, which we should take responsible for the ones that we are causing, whether it's through hunting or whatever.
But they evolved to adapt a diet that they can only absorb like 4% of nutrition from what they eat exclusively is bamboo. So they literally have to eat all the time. They can't even hibernate because they have to keep eating because what they eat is not right for them. So
are we doing just as much damage by trying to keep a species alive that isn't?
No.
I don't know. Meant to? I don't know if that's the right word. But
that's a good question.
But to respond to that, there's a difference between looking for dogs to hit, coming up to a situation where you have to hit a dog, and then coming up to a situation where you see dead dogs everywhere and everyone driving cars and nobody asking where the hell this stuff came from. The problem is there are species.
Though, is that it's not the cars
hold on.
Fault.
My point is, because there are situations where species are dying out, and they're dying out because they have not adapted to the world that we have shaped so intricately. We could step back and just say, well, this species just is not keeping up with the times, right? They're not evolving quick enough. Species have died for millions of years, and that's demonstrable. So let's just let this kind of die out. When in reality, if we did a little bit of digging, we might find that we were the cause. Like bees, for instance. People thought, oh, well, it's not, the bees are dying out, but we just can't really figure out why. And we could just stop right there and say it's not human caused. Maybe this is just the way of the world. But when we dug a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure it's because of certain pesticides or other things that we're doing. And so
yeah.
And that highlights the interconnectedness of things. Is that?
But I'm not saying that we take out responsibility. I'm not saying the pandas are dying and we should just let them do it. I'm saying we should do our due diligence. But I'm also saying it's not inconceivable that some species are just going to die regardless of what we can do. And even if we look at over time when species die out, maybe it's another species that was more dominant that came about.
Yeah, you're right.
My problem is that
you're right. And the human being is so dominant, not just the dominant species, but so dominant that the existence of almost every other animal on our planet now depends upon our actions. And so whatever world we decide to create is going to destroy species. And shouldn't we take the extra effort to not be the species to end all species? Like, it just seems kind of like...
But I think pandas are a really good example because it is because of their diet. And they don't like to have sex. Like, you have to force them and they can't procreate. So, like, they really... Okay, I love that I can go to a zoo in San Diego and see a panda. I love watching panda videos on the internet, like where the baby panda sneezes and it scares the mom. But here's the thing. When you spend millions of dollars trying to protect a species from going extinct, but there are horrific tragedies happening in the world and people dying of starvation, it's really hard for me... And I say this as like a total nature-loving hippie to say, well, that money is well spent.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
Let me help you out because we had this exact same conversation about NASA, and I helped you out there. So here we go. When you have a company come into an area and deforest an entire area that pandas had depended upon for bamboo, and they send this species into almost into an endangered zone, but they're making millions of dollars off of what they're doing. They should be responsible for paying for the protection of that species, right? Like, yeah, you're right.
Deforestation
it takes a lot
that's its own thing.
It's not just its own thing. Right? Like, there are people who are responsible for the actions that destroy for instance, in California, they're trying to put in tunnels that are going to destroy miles and miles and miles of wetland and ruin the habitation of 200 species of birds. This is happening like around the corner from where I live. And it's like, well, you could just say, like that money that we could use to protect those animals is better spent somewhere else. But it's like there are corporate interests that are trying to get these tunnels put in to keep their level of how much water costs equal in the future, to keep it stable. That's their only goal, is profit. And they're pressuring the government to do this. And it's like the human entities that are making money off of things that destroy species should have the responsibility to replenish that. So it's not like there's all these resources we're wasting on these animals. It's that there's people who are making all of this money and all of these resources off of the stuff that's around these animals, or off the animals themselves. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think that It makes sense. And I think that this is kind of the highlight of our conversation. Like, to ask the question, what's a meaningful response to environmental issues? To even ask that question hints that there's some kind of internal struggle. Like, I really want to know what to do the right thing is, because there's so much information out there. And like we talked about in the beginning, it can feel helpless. Like, who did this? What did we do? So I think for us, maybe a good way to kind of guide the rest of this conversation is for us to answer, like, what meaningful responses are we trying to do in our daily lives, and then what is our struggle in this issue? Like, what do we struggle with when we consider what we do and how we do it?
So you're saying ignore so we've talked about the boundaries, right? Like the faith that says the world's going to die anyway, let's just let it go. And on the other side, you could say it's really good for the earth for humans to start eating themselves, right? Like if the human species just started becoming cannibalistic and ate other humans, it would actually help our planet. No, I'm just saying that is the furthest end of the other spectrum, is no regard for human life, the destruction of our humanity. We could actually help the planet ecologically if we just like culled human numbers down, but nobody would ever argue for that. So there has to be
people
something
have
right.
argued for population declines, actually.
Really?
Oh yeah. Like, I think that was in the 70s. That was a big thing, and like when
not cannibalism, right? I mean,
no.
okay.
No.
So there
Why
has
do we
to
keep
be
going
somewhere.
back to cannibalism?
Because
I don't know. We
it's a
really
point to
like
be
talking
made.
about cannibalism. No, what? Here. Let me ask you a question though. How vital to life do you think toilet paper is?
I couldn't live
I
without
don't know
it.
if I'm the right person to answer.
On a scale of 1 to 10, like how vital to your life is
9.
toilet paper? I would say a 9 also.
I would say 11.
Okay, so Alan, you were mentioning deforestation, corporate greed, and those people should be responsible. Okay, but listen, corporations can be nasty pieces of crap. Haha, no pun intended. But when global toilet paper use consumes 27,000 trees a day, those companies are responding to demand. Like, we demand that be available for us to purchase and use in our bums. Therefore, deforestation happens. You know, like, this is not just an isolated group of people who are responsible for killing pandas. It's all of us.
So you're saying personal choice impacts the wider world. So if we chose to use less toilet paper than we currently do, we could save some trees and slow the process of deforestation.
Well, yeah, we could. Actually, that's true. And that's just toilet paper.
So
We're not talking about any
there's
other kind of paper.
There's a good, meaningful thing that we can do to use less has a wider impact on demand for companies to, and if everybody kind of gets on board with this, it would have a bigger impact. That is a meaningful day-to-day response.
That's among, I mean, but just think about that multiplied by all the waste that we put out in our lives. You know, like I throw paper away. I don't even think twice about it.
Well, I think that's part of the problem, is that we're trying, just like we talked about this idea, we keep going back to this analogy of the dog and the kid, but one of our conclusions from that was that life was interconnected. And if life is interconnected, then we can't assume that problems aren't. So if we're going to solve something, it can't be, here's this one demon that we need to slay and everything's going to be fine. We are all interconnected in how that problem has started. And until we realize that, maybe we can't even begin to tackle any major problems until we first realize our part and then figure out how we can help fix the other parts.
Yeah, but I think and collectively we need a large change in thinking, though, about
yeah,
all of
but
this.
if it's worth doing, if the environment is worth saving and the ecology is worth thinking about and doing as individuals, then it's worth doing at least a little bit, even if we can't be perfect.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Save some toilet paper. My big hammer that I can drop on this question, and I feel like it's the answer that shouldn't even exist, but it does, is that the most pollution in the world, at least in greenhouse gases, and the biggest polluter of our water sources is animal agriculture. So if we eat less, literally, if we eat less meat as individuals, we save water, fossil fuels, and we prevent greenhouse gases more than any other decision that we can make. I feel like that's the biggest thing. Just eating a little bit less meat would make the biggest difference on an individual scale. And I can explain why, but it's going to get super preachy.
Tell us why.
Tell you why? Okay.
I must know.
The UN studied and discovered that animal agriculture, raising animals to eat, was responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than all the transportation in the world. All of the planes, the boats, everything you can add together, they do not pollute our world as much as us eating meat and needing animals to make food. So eating meat causes greenhouse gas emissions, it also requires 11 calories of fossil fuels per 1 calorie of protein from like chickens, fish, pigs, and cows. So every time you eat meat, you're actually burning fossil fuels. You are a part of the whole that uses those fuels to make that meat. So
you're talking about like for the entire lifespan of the animal's care.
Yeah, for the entire lifespan of the animal's care, the transportation of the different stuff, like all of it together. Wow. I think it was the EPA who said that. The USDA. The USDA said it takes 11 calories of fossil fuels to produce 1 calorie of protein. So there's greenhouse gas, fossil fuels. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, confirmed that confined animal feeding operations, like where you have like those big dairy things and other animals, big plantations of pigs and stuff, they account for more water pollution than all other industries together. Fracking, wow. Like everything you can imagine. More water pollution happens because of the animals that we raise to eat. And then nearly half...
And you're talking specifically of in major, like, corporate industrial...
Yes. Yeah, big agribusiness. Yeah. Nearly half of all the water in the U.S. goes to raising animals. Half of all water.
That's nuts.
Some people have claimed, and some people will argue about this, but it still stands, that not eating a pound of meat saves the same amount of water as if you didn't shower daily for 6 months, if you didn't shower at all.
For 1 pound
of
meat?
For 1 pound of meat, you would save 6 months of showers.
That's mind-blowing.
Well, because a cow drinks water its whole life, right?
But even like if you had a neighbor next door, that caring for that animal is still using a lot of resources.
Sure.
Like even if it's completely locally sourced, right?
What 1 pound of meat requires 2,400 gallons of water to be raised to maturity. 1 pound of vegetables is 25 gallons. So you're looking at like an unbelievable amount. This is kind of funny. So like I've been overweight, right? And I've had a lot of things on my conscience about using more than I should be allotted. I look at the world. I look at like how much of this world I should take and use. And I've always felt like I'm eating more calories than I need, and I'm eating more calories than I probably should take. But I didn't realize my calories cost more than other calories. Like when you choose to eat meat, it's not just the calories that you're eating that you're consuming from the whole. It's that my calories cost like thousands of times more to create than the calories other people are eating. So the water cost, like every time I choose to eat meat, I'm using way more water than my neighbors who eat less meat do. And I never even realized that. I'm using more fossil fuels and I'm polluting the earth more. And like we don't even realize that because it's such a big part of our lives and it's such like a unquestionable thing that it's largely invisible and unseen. But if that's the biggest factor, like we have to start talking about that. To say that you care about the environment but you don't try to eat less meat is like, for a lot of people, they've begun to say that that's hypocrisy. It's hypocritical to think that way.
Well, maybe. Yes.
Because it's the biggest problem.
I think I agree with you, but there's also I just listened to we were talking about this off air, but I listened to a podcast that kind of is talking about all the things that you're talking about, and I think that there's a lot of things and reform that needs to be done in that major industry. But there's a spectrum, like you eat less meat or less meat or no meat, or just knowing where your meat come from, because regardless of whether, like you're talking about, just to use the idea of water consumption. Water consumption for 1 pound of meat is how many gallons did you say?
2,400.
2,400. So that's 6 months worth of showers, depending upon
how long your shower is, I guess. Yeah.
Or like buying anything made out of cotton. Like cotton, it takes a ton of water, like more than almost any other crop.
Well,
yeah.
No. Wait.
Hold on. Let me finish this point.
Let me finish this point. I have to respond to that before you finish the point,
I...
because we can't get away from it. Cotton and almonds return water to the water table clean. Animals do not. When animals use water, it's polluted. So that's totally different.
We're just trying to wrap our minds, before we're calling for any ethical action, we're just trying to wrap our minds around our impact. Because a lot of us just don't know what our impact is
Jeff,
in the world as we eat a pound of meat. Go ahead, Jeff.
Damn, I don't know. I lost it. I was that's why I was trying to freaking crap. Okay, well, here we go. So this idea of like, that's a good statistic, and that's being aware. But I think that it's also true how much more water, and I don't mean this as a way to say to discount everything you're doing. I'm saying it as as a way to make sure that we don't take a snapshot of any one issue and like allow it to stop us from further investigating the issue. I want to clarify that before I move on. But if you keep that cow alive longer, then it's taking up more water. And I know that we can talk about dairy industry and all that kind of stuff. So
are
what
you
I'm saying
advocating
is
veal? Is that
No.
what I'm advocating is I think sometimes, and Alan, I'm not saying that you're doing this. So I want to address that.
Okay.
But what we do sometimes is we get on this issue and say, here's the solution, which I don't think any of us would disagree that there's a problem with the meat industry. But I think that sometimes you can be so passionate and so careful about an issue that you're this, you restrain yourself from every way and communicate it in such a way that says that if you're not all in, then you're not in at all, and you might as well not. Like that whole hot and cold analogy that we probably all grew up with in church.
I don't think I'm doing that because I started out the conversation with G.K. Chesterton.
I know. I said that. I clarified that before I started.
What do you mean about the cow living
saying.
longer would use more water?
Because it would be drinking water.
So, what is
but
that?
I'm not. I don't want to get caught up on the issue. I'm just using that as a small example of. I agree with what you're saying, and I think that everything you're saying is important and should influence us to be more careful about how much meat we consume, and then also where it's coming from, but not to. I think we as a society assume too much on how people should respond, as opposed to like, here's the issue and figure out how you need to respond.
But these are real. So for me, this approaches, there is no single answer. There is no single moral answer for every single human being on the planet. Everybody's different. But this approaches that single answer for me. This approaches the most important thing you can do in the ecology conversation. And the thing about dairy cows drinking water, they impregnate dairy cows every year because they want them to lactate more. And usually the bond between a dairy cow and its child is so strong, and the child drinks milk, they wouldn't have as many babies or have as much milk as that they're producing, right? So artificially inseminating the cow, taking their baby away from them immediately so that all the milk can be used by humans, and then like putting them through a process where they're milked by machines, and then when they're done, they're killed in a certain way. I could go on, and we'll probably talk about animal rights on the side as a bonus episode or maybe in the future. But all that to say, we are artificially pushing certain species like animals like cows and pigs to the point where they're producing more milk than their young could ever drink, right? Pigs, we are treating animals in certain ways that put a burden on the rest of the world. And so like these are kind of clear-cut issues as much as clear-cut issues could exist. So for me,
but there's no clear-cut response.
There is a clear-cut response. The demand has to be less for meat. Right now, we put meat in absolutely everything. We eat it all the time. And as long as that demand is there, someone is going to put up a factory farm somewhere and farm that way.
True. No, what I mean by individual response, not like overall response. You're right. There's a clear cut, like we need to reduce this. Just like we talked about toilet paper, use one square instead of two. I don't know, whatever your ritual is with that. But what I'm saying is you're right. But when it comes to imposing individual responses, like you're choosing a path that is vegetarian and you're really mindful of that. And I think that's important. And honestly, it inspires me to make sure that I'm decreasing a certain amount in my meat consumption and then being more aware of where my meat is coming from. But I'm not prepared to make that next leap into saying I'm just going to cut meat out.
Yeah, that's because we haven't had the full conversation.
Even if you say one day a week I'm not going to eat meat or 2 days a week,
meatless Mondays,
that still has a huge impact.
So we kill. Can you guys guess how many animals are killed every year for food? If you thought about it, in the world, 56 billion animals are killed every year to feed us. And that's not including like dairy cows or hen-laying chickens or stuff that are still producing stuff for us. That's just counting animals that are killed for us. 56 billion.
Globally, yeah.
And
there's a huge disproportion there, right? Because in some places they might not eat meat except for a couple of times a year.
Oh yeah. So it's concentrated in certain places on our planet.
In certain places.
Yeah,
but I think we should go back to talking about cultures of excess in general, because the whole conversation about environmental sustainability is about consumption. It really is like, and you're right, the production will rise or wane, wax or wane to meet consumption and demand. So like so for and this goes into like even the ways that we farm. A lot of people don't know this, but one of the bigger a pretty significant issue in climate change and oxygen production is nitrogen that we use in fertilizer. So every year we convert about 120 million tons of nitrogen for the atmosphere into forms of like nitrates that can be used in fertilizer. So you cannot grow food without fertilizer, without nitrogen. Sorry. You can grow it without fertilizer, but like the big plump vegetables that you see in your store, they don't grow without gobs of nitrogen. And some places in the world have more nitrogen than others. And it's really interesting because in some places in the world, they might have really fertile farmland, but because they can't access fertilizer or nitrogen-based fertilizer, the land basically is fallow and it doesn't produce. Here, what we do is we dump an extraordinary amount of fertilizer on our plants. The excess of that fertilizer, the excess nitrogen runs off into our oceans, like gets in the groundwater, runs to the oceans and kills phytoplankton, which produces oxygen. So this stuff is like, and then the oxygen is like affects our air quality and it affects all kinds of things, right? If we don't have oxygen in our air, like all of life suffers. So it's like crazy how interconnected this stuff is, but that the culture of excess of like using way more than we need when other places have nitrogen deficiencies is really interesting. And that like that could actually like in a lot of places in the world, just getting proper nitrogen to those areas and in fertilizer forms could actually solve starvation issues and actually allow people to produce. Like it's not a one-stop solution. It's more complicated than that, the way markets work and everything. But that's why we need to educate ourselves on what this means. And like, but at a basic level, our culture is of excess and not caring what kind of runoff or what our excess is doing is highly problematic.
So I don't farm, right? I'm a voter, and I guess I have a co-host a podcast. So there's certain things I can do. The reason Jeff brought up that I was a vegetarian. I'm trying it out this year. The reason I became a vegetarian was I had read a fictional book, blah, blah, blah. It's about this future dystopia by Margaret Atwood, The Year of the Flood. And there's these people who eat mystery burgers, which they don't know what meat is in it. The corporation just decides for today, we're going to put this type of meat in this burger. And it's kind of, fun. You're going to eat it. You don't know what you're eating. And it was like horrifying to me. But then I looked at my own life and I realized that's basically what I do. Whenever I eat out at a fast food place, I'm just taking something that I have no idea what's really in it and eating it, right? And so the
we
day
trust
before
the FDA.
The day really okay the day
to a degree
we trust
right?
corporations who are sometimes audited by the FDA to help us get the right food, but we're trusting corporations on a large scale to deal with all these animals in our lives that we eat every day. All I'm trying to point out is your point about excess really hits home for me, because the reason I became a vegetarian, the day before I had a breakfast that had pig, cow, chicken, eggs from a different chicken, and milk from a different dairy cow, all in one tiny little meal. And so like I ate that without ever thinking about it kind of my whole life, where this stuff came from, what was in it. Talk about excess. Like I'm eating multiple different animals for every single meal and consuming resources that are invisible to me. It looks like a small breakfast, but really the resources that got poured into creating that breakfast are completely hidden. And so the reason I'm trying out vegetarianism is because you're right. It is maybe an easier answer than just eating less meat or kind of knowing where my food comes from. But for me, I'm doing it for ethical reasons that we won't get into here, because that's not necessarily ecology. That's more like moral and philosophical and religious reasons why I do that. But just the excess of it, like you avoid that when you do eat vegetables, when you do eat plant-based food and nuts and grains and stuff, you are putting a serious dent in your consumption and excess in this society that is an ungodly consumption and excess built upon money that makes money for people that do injustice at an even bigger level. So yeah, extricating yourself, you can extricate yourself from that entire process by just choosing not to eat meat, for sure. So that's why I do it. And I'm not telling other people that they have to do it, but it's hard in this conversation to take people seriously when they talk about fossil fuels. You look at the UN and everyone's talking about fossil fuels. They're going to lower it and do this, but they don't say anything about agribusiness. Like in our society, that doesn't say anything about agribusiness because you don't want to upset certain people. like the oil industry is gross, right? We all know that. Everyone's like, oh, the oil industry is just trying to do this, try to do that.
We subsidize both industries, which is interesting.
Yeah. The government gives them money to prop up something that's unsustainable. But I just think the future, I'm looking at the future of humanity and where we're headed. You lose, you only get like what, 9% of the nutrients back. Like it takes so many calories to go into 1 calorie of meat, all the food it eats, right? The vegetables or the whatever it's eating. And we have people in the world that are starving, and like the future of humanity is probably vegetarian. If we're going to have a sustainable humanity in the future with like billions and billions and billions of more people, we're going to have to move in that direction. And so I'm looking at it from the point of social justice too, and thinking like we need to have a sustainable world for humans. And that's not the whole picture, but that's a big part of it. So it's a pretty big issue. It's the biggest.
The oceans are dying too. I mean, there's a lot of issues, though. There's a lot of issues. The oceans are dying. Like, I think we've lost like half of the fish in the ocean by this point.
Yes.
Half.
50%.
And the ocean actually absorbs the carbon dioxide that we produce. So the acidity of the oceans has risen by gobs and is expecting to like go to almost 150% by 2100. So it basically like dissolves the smallest sea creatures, which has a giant like chain effect in the ocean's ecosystems, ecological structures, which means that people can't eat fish. Like that's another huge food source for billions of people. I don't know, man, we're gonna run out of food, you guys. This is
and
it's
speaking
bleak.
of running out of something, we're probably running a little bit low on our time.
We're running out of time as well. No, okay, so let's go back to meaning. Okay, what can we meaningfully do? Reduce waste and excess. Be mindful of what we consume. Put pressure on people who eat less meat. Yep. Put pressure on people who make decisions to be more educated about these issues. Support people who are doing good farming practices and not
be mindful of your consumption of anything.
Yeah. And it goes a lot. I know a lot of people who are like, oh, we recycle, we care about the environment, that we've done it, that's it. But actually like read up on recycling and how much it does not do, for the environment. It doesn't have as big of an impact as you think it does, like not eating meat.
I must say being mindful is hard. I think just saying being mindful has never really worked for me. The entry point for me into mindfulness about what I consume was being grateful. And we talked about having an episode on gratefulness in the future.
We should do it.
But if you're grateful for the food you're eating, you're definitely be more mindful of it. And so just being grateful for the things that you consume in your world, it's impossible to get away from consumption. To live, you have to have calories in, you have to have oxygen in, you have all these things. But be mindful of be grateful of what you consume, and the mindfulness will follow.
But don't you think gratefulness doesn't require you to change anything? Yeah. It's just like,
it's just the beginning.
My heart is full and brimming with all of
very
this
true.
Gratitude.
There are people who have that's very true. But I feel like it's if you want to be more mindful and you want to change your actions, gratefulness is a good place to start. It definitely is only a starting block. It doesn't go anywhere if you don't do anything with it. Yeah.
Man, compost and grow your own food too, right? By the way.
I'm trying.
Yeah. You're trying.
Well, let us know what you think in the show notes at irenicast.com/46. There you'll be able to comment on this particular episode and address any of the issues that we may have brought up. Also, you will be able to find informational links on some of the things that we discussed in this episode. On the other side of the music, we will be attributing different animals to your illustrious co-hosts. All right, so we're bringing back, not bringing back, this is kind of our default segment, what we call Knowin Jemonen. So it's little insights into the personalities of the hosts of this show. And Jemonen is we
don't have any
It's our self-indulgent narcissism.
Yeah, exactly. And I say celebrity in huge quotes, bigger than my hands are able to. This is our celebrity name. We've meshed our names together into Jemonen. And
Can I say something last night? Because this is a true fact, right? That we've apparently been heard in 34 countries.
Yes, we have.
And 34 countries have heard us gab, which is like mind-blowing. And I was kind of ruminating on this. And so I was like, 34 countries. And they're like, oh my God, she's an internet celebrity. And I turned bright red. I was like, it's really not true.
It's only true when you see people who listen to it and they're like, I've been listening to you every week. And I'm like, whoa. Weird.
It's kind of true.
Well, that's too much responsibility.
I like it.
No, it's
Celebrity
not true.
with Z-list, not like D or E, like we're Z. We're,
Z-list.
we're way in the bottom, but you know it.
I'm going to try to get an IMDb page for myself.
I don't
Wow.
think podcasts count. Maybe if we put a YouTube video up, you'd be able to.
Back in the day, we
How about a
created
Wikipedia
we
page?
created a Wikipedia page for our friend's mom and said some pretty bad things about her. But that was back a long time ago when I was younger.
So why would you
I was like
do
18 years
that?
old because it was funny.
You were 18?
Not like 13.
That was back when
Yeah.
Wikipedia was not what it is now. I would never imagine
Why were you mean to his
doing
mom?
that. It was
Her mom?
up there for like maybe a week. We showed it to him. Nobody else in the world saw it. Probably
But why would you do that?
because it's
Maybe
funny.
there's that one person who's like, "Oh, I'm gonna get that lady." Ran across the article and it's now fuming.
It was
mad.
obviously satire. I mean, like it's.
You know better than anyone that obvious satire still goes over the head of a
Oh
lot
man,
of people.
I that almost ruined the blog that I was running. That spawned that I Rent a Cast came from, and I Rent a Con, the blog I wrote for like 4 or 5 years. I started doing satire, and people were so angry. I mean, it was really bad.
Let's officially do this. So Mona, you're gonna start.
I'm going to go for a beaver with Alan. I feel like he's a little bit wily. You know? He's always like gnawing on stuff. I don't know. Kind of cuddly. Kind of lovable. That's what I'm going.
Wow,
What do you think?
I do like trees. It was very true.
You like trees? Are you a good swimmer?
I like damming up rivers and then letting them break and killing a bunch of other animals. No,
Is this something people think about a lot? Like what animal people would be?
I don't know.
Yeah. I've had extensive conversations with my friends about what animal people are.
Is this the
What do you think, Jeff?
equivalent of
Do you
people
like
that
beaver?
look like their dogs? No, I wouldn't say beaver. That doesn't fit my understanding.
No, because beavers are
of
like
Alan.
solid. They're like in their little home all by themselves, building their little stuff. That's not me, right?
They have little families.
Well, that
I'm
part
extroverted.
a little bit. Maybe.
The beavers on
Let's see.
Chronicles of Narnia, when I watched it, they didn't act extroverted.
See, I was just gonna say, like my my ideas are coming from caricatures of like cartoon
Of
animals
talking
and stuff.
beavers?
Yeah.
That's
So
what we're
you know what?
basing
I would
this
go. I'm gonna go with owl for Alan.
Hey, you know what's funny? That's the only thing I thought of when you guys said that. I was like, what animal would I be? There is an embarrassing animal that I'm not going to even talk about. That
you
my
have to say it
college
now.
friends put pictures of my face on when I was.
You
in
do need to
college.
say it
You have
now.
to tell us.
But
You want to
but
tell
that
us.
aside,
You wouldn't have brought it
hey,
up otherwise.
the owl thing. I thought of owl. Jeff, that was the first thing that popped into my mind, and I was like, maybe owl, but yeah. Well, okay, the embarrassing one is in high school, people in Sunday school used to start calling me Grumpy Gorilla because I would be grumpy sometimes, and they'd say things, and I'd get sad, and they'd make fun of me. So they put pictures in college of a gorilla with my face photoshopped on it, and put it up on my wall.
Can I call you Grumpy Gorilla?
No, because it really impacted me 10
hurt
years.
you.
Of course you can. That's fine. I don't really care. I might get grumpy about it if I'm in a certain state of mind. But as a middle child, you can say grumpy or disaffected, whatever you want,
Emo?
disempowered.
Oh my
That's fine.
God. Yeah, you can't be a beaver.
I like owl. Let's go with owl and just leave it at that.
They're always
That's
going,
nice.
hoo-hoo. I'm a middle child.
Yeah.
Hoo-hoo.
A screech owl.
You guys
I'm a
forgot about me.
middle
Hoo-hoo. Womp womp. Grumpy Gorilla.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh my goodness!
All right,
All right,
let's go with
Jeffrey?
what would Jeff be?
Jeff. Oh, man.
Talk about wily.
Jeff likes to cook. I wouldn't describe Jeff as
just
wily.
kidding.
I wouldn't.
Whenever we do this, whenever we look into Jeff's psychology as a family, because we do that for fun sometimes, we play like board games and stuff, like therapy, we always end up saying Jeff's a horrible person for some reason. That's like always the end result.
It always goes back to that, and I don't,
You are a horrible person.
I'm not
that's
gonna. Apparently, I'm the worst person in the world.
I think of you as like a big Papa Bear, Jeff.
No.
No?
Way. No.
Okay. At least on this show, you're always like corralling us.
Is that your official answer?
No, I'm just ruminating.
What's a pragmatic animal that
A practical animal?
collects stuff? Pragmatic.
Pragmatic. Maybe Jeff's the beaver. Oh, man.
Yeah, maybe Jeff is the
Maybe
beaver.
Jeff's the beaver.
I'd be okay with that. I think that's closer.
But I feel like beavers, like, do they reject authority and, like, have a tune about things?
No, they're kind of like they're communal animals, right? Like they work together.
Yeah,
and
they work together. They kind of had their own plan in mind. Okay, yeah, that could be it.
So are you saying I'm a beaver too? Are you just
Everyone's
defaulting to
beaver.
beaver? I think that's lazy.
You're very productive.
Let's think longer, and you could just cut out the silence. I have to think longer. I have to really think about this. Not panda bear.
That would be horrible considering how we just talked about everything. I would be mortally offended, and this would be the last I ran a cast.
Jeff is a crow.
Podcast is your bamboo.
Sorry, bro.
What?
Yeah,
A
they're very
crow?
smart.
Okay, explain yourself, please.
Yeah.
A crow?
You appreciated in the Old Testament Balaam, who was just being opportunistic, just trying to take care of himself. Right?
And you talk like
And
this.
it cursed
No,
Israel.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You said that. So, like, crows just do what they got to. They're practical animals, right? They do
I
what
think
they
all
got to do. They
animals do what
find
they got to do to some degree.
find some dead stuff.
Crows are like a literary sign of death and destruction. And like every time you see a crow in a movie,
You
something
are-
bad's
That's
about
true.
to happen.
That is true.
You are the crow. I love The Office when Dwight is asked his favorite movie, and he like is walking away all angry, and he's all the crow. I love that movie.
Man,
Anyway, is that bad?
I don't like this game. I
Is
don't
that
like it at
offensive?
all.
It's not offensive. I just
crow,
wasn't.
yeah.
It wasn't funny.
It's not funny.
I wasn't offended. I just wasn't
funny
amused.
Okay,
So,
maybe Jeff is a desert lizard.
What? Okay,
that
explain
bad?
yourself again, please.
I don't know. You're warm.
You're warm.
I could see you like lizards are always like by themselves, sunbathing, doing push-ups.
You always got
I
this
don't
like
know.
Why
lizard
do you
grin.
assume that I'm always like by myself in this like?
You always
Oh
got
my
a
goodness.
lizard.
You do your own thing.
You got to
You
smirk.
flout the conventions of society when you don't think that they're appropriate. True or not?
That's true. I would agree with that.
What about a crocodile?
Not a crocodile. That's horrible.
Why?
Okay, see.
They have like a smirk
Wait.
all the time.
You don't like.
I'd rather be one of
crow.
those like thieving monkeys that tourists take photos of.
All right, Jeff's
No.
a thieving monkey, and Alan is a
silly-
grumpy
silly
gorilla.
monkey. I think we should go with crocodile for Jeff.
Don't you
Because
think-
they just protect themselves. They have families and stuff. I think that's actually
You
a
kinda-
really good.
You love
description.
to
Very
hang out like a
powerful.
log in water and just wait there.
And pull people under until they drown, and then
Your eyes are always twitchy.
man. All right, Mona, it's your turn. What's
I
Mona's
dug a
animal
grave
going to be?
for myself.
I was going to go super nice. Now I'm ready. I'm ready to
An antelope is what I would say.
an antelope.
Because I'm
What?
hard-headed.
I just imagine Mona bounding through the wilderness, kind of like free spirited but scared at the same time.
That's kind of true.
I'm sorry. You know what? I shouldn't be doing this.
No,
this
it's
is
fine.
that's the
I'll take
problem.
an antelope. Sure. That means I'm hunted.
What do,
Oh.
what do you think, Jeff?
I'm going to calm down first so that I don't say something.
I am so sorry.
No,
Jeff.
I want to
And
know.
I
What were you
should've
going
gone
to say
first, 'cause
vindictive?
then I could've-
Come on.
No, I wasn't going to say anything. I was just joking. For
Why
for
are
some
you
reason,
upset?
like the first image that came to my mind was a squirrel.
I've been compared to a squirrel a lot.
Just in the sense
that's
that
pretty
like
good.
not just any squirrel, but like a squirrel in like a city park. Like you're around
Way
all
too
this
friendly
stuff, and
squirrel.
you can't sit still. You've got to move like over here and over
But you
there,
gotta
and
keep
like
moving.
just like this constant like go kind of.
I really
thing.
love nuts.
Well, I wasn't gonna go there, but you know.
What were you thinking about? I'm talking about like peanuts and almonds.
Those are legumes.
Oh my god.
Jeff, you should appreciate that when I try to think of an animal for you, I couldn't think of anything. I just can't. But when I think of Mona, I think of animals right away for some reason. Is that weird?
Because I'm a beast.
But we've just established that animals are an important part of the ecosystem. So basically,
know.
you can't think of how I would fit into this world.
That's that's right.
Man, I either you have a horrible perception of reality, or I really am self-unaware in so many ways.
I tried to make you a Papa Bear, and that idea was rejected, okay? That's a kindly
Yeah, I don't
image.
see him
Not
as
by
a
me.
Papa
I didn't
Bear.
say
You said
anything.
nothing.
I don't see him as a Papa
Just
Bear.
like a Papa Bear would. No, Alan, you guys know each other a lot better. Like, because the three of us have lived like physically apart for really like a decade, right? But you guys have spent a lot more time together than like I've spent with you. So I feel like you could have a better image.
Jeff defies
Jeff.
all categories. It's really hard to put an
Like
animal
a
for Jeff.
panther,
None
like
of
a
those sound
snow
good.
leopard.
I don't know. Yeah. Like a snow leopard. Jeff is definitely some sort of feline. I think you're on the right track right now. There we
A
go.
lion,
Not a lion.
a giant squid.
A jaguar or something.
You say giant squid?
So Jeff has been a raven, a crocodile, a giant squid. I do like snow leopard. I think that's
Giant
good
squids are hard
for
to
Jeff.
pin down, just like Jeff.
I don't know enough about snow leopards to be offended.
They're the most elusive creatures.
Why do you have to be offended? They're
because so
kinda-
far you have a pretty good track
Trying
record.
to encapsulate your presence in the form of an animal.
You know
I
what?
guess so.
Maybe giant squid is good. Giant squid or snow leopard, one of those two.
Snow leopard are too,
Okay, well,
are too
what
solitary.
does a snow leopard do? Like, give me a picture. Like, why a snow leopard?
Oh, because they like blend into the environment when they need to.
Okay, I can see
Aw.
that.
Is that? But the son who's
They're photographic, photogenic.
Whoa, you don't have to make the jump to sociopath. My goodness.
I think blending into the environment is not. That was look.
I think we should quit while we're
They're
ahead with this
fast.
game.
Hold on. They're fast.
They're fast. They're very fast.
They're
They
fast
like
and
the
they're
cold.
majestic.
They eat things.
Right? Yeah. They're arresting when you see them. Like Jeff's presence is arresting in a room, and everybody.
I think a tricky tourist monkey is better though, because Jeff, like, he,
No, Jeff's not a tricky.
that's what he
tourist
wants to
monkey.
be. I feel like
No.
that's
Monkeys are too close to human beings. We share like with 95% DNA.
I was just throwing something out there because that's the last thing I saw on YouTube. So.
Jeff is a sneezing panda bear. I don't know. This game is deteriorating quickly.
It is. It's become.
I'm sorry. It was my idea to play this game, and I'm proud. I'm still proud of it. Next time we'll do which car would you be if you were a car. I like these kinds of games if you can't tell.
No, because I'm going to be like a Hummer or something like a tank or something that like kills people.
You're gonna be a
And
Fiesta.
Fictional characters, I'd be Dexter, some serial killer psychopath.
No, Jeff.
Jeff, you're not a horrible
Oh, my
person.
goodness.
You're gonna give him a complex.
No, you can't give me any more complexes than
You
I
have a
already
million complexes.
All right.
Yeah, let's call it.
Yeah, this is too much of Knowin Jemonen, I think.
Yep, I think so.
All
too.
right, so that'll do it for us this week. Thank you so much for joining us. You can support the show by rating and reviewing on whatever platform you listen to the show, preferably iTunes or Stitcher. And now, if you see a link of a book on our show notes, if you click on that and purchase it from Amazon, it gives us a little bit to kind of cover our costs. So that's another way you can support the show. And yeah, I think that'll be doing it. So
That'll be doing it.
I have
Don't cut that out, please. That'll be doing it.
We'll see. That'll be doing it. So we done finished this week, and
Don't start doing that. Don't make fun of people who have different speech patterns than you. How dare you?
How dare you?
How dare you?
I'm still fresh off the Southern dinner, y'all. That bourbon's still kicking. That'll be doing it.
So for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
Thanks for joining the conversation.
Eat lesbian.
You two are horribly funny.
I said eat lesbian. Anyway,
All right. Has everyone stopped their recording?
no.